Hello again, YouTube. This is Honest Pizzle, or Bitter Clean Texan, or the Prom Queen, or whatever handle you know me as. Today I'm going to talk about something. Of course, everybody's talking about the Zimmerman trial, but in the aftermath of it, there's a big discussion on crime stats and race, the disparity of, blacks in prison versus whites, record. And generally most people come on one or two sides and attribute it to one or two things. You have your people, mostly left-wingers, that attribute it to institutional racism, profiling, and whatnot. Then you have your right-wingers, who generally, a lot of time, attribute it to hip-hop culture, fatherlessness, or just black people being more criminal-minded. I am here today to make the assertion that there's another factor that nobody discusses that actually probably has more to do with it than anything. It is the fact that although both the criminal element and the white and black population comes from your poorer and less educated, most of your poorer and less educated black Americans are concentrated in densely populated inner cities like South Central Los Angeles or Brooklyn, New York, or the west side of Chicago, or Ninth Ward, New Orleans. Most of the poor, potentially criminal element of the white population tend to be spread out over rural areas and small and mid-sized towns. And that in itself is going to create a disparity in the number of arrests, prosecutions, and sentencing. And you're probably like, Paul, what the hell? What does that have to do with anything? Well, it has a lot to do with it. The first thing it has to do with it is sheer presence of law enforcement. Okay, if you're in the backwoods of East Texas, the sheriff probably, you're not in East city limits, sheriffs ain't going to come unless they're called, and there's just not a lot of law enforcement. And if you live in smaller to mid-sized towns, there's not the presence. Now, however, if you live in Houston or Oklahoma City, you've got all kinds of, traffic cops, bicycle cops in the park, a lot of times beat cops walking, although you don't see it as much in the South. You have, sheriff's department in town, you have constables, you have city police that are undercover and plainclothes that aren't undercover, and a lot of federal task force. So therefore, more cops. If you're doing something that is against the letter of the law, more likely you'll get arrested. And then there's also the densely population and the population turnover. In a lot of these little towns, there's not very many people, so if you're doing something, probably nobody's going to see you unless they're doing it with you. And also the same families a lot of time in these smaller towns and rural areas, they've been living there generation after generation. So, if little Johnny's, smoking a joint, on Mr. Smith's property, he'll probably just call little Johnny's mama rather than call the law. That has a lot to do with it. And then the profiling aspect. Well, most of the time, law enforcement in these smaller places, they don't really have to profile because they know everybody or know somebody that knows them. Whereas in the big city, if you're a cop, you just kind of got to do the math. Now, that comes to just coming into contact. Oh, and another thing is that, well, I already addressed that. In any case, then we're going to come to the sentencing and the processing part of it. Okay, in these smaller places, a lot of time the cop on the scene might know both parties and they can resolve it without legal action. Or, if charges are pressed or whatever, generally a teacher or relative or something, if it's the first time offender, not, too much, hey, little Johnny's a good kid, he just got mixed up with them, Jackson's over there, and everybody knows they've been in trouble since the 1940s. Okay, and he might get off with a deferred probation and a shit ton of community service. Whereas if little Leroy breaks into a house, whatever, he goes to Dallas or Harris County, he don't know nobody. And he's just a number, and the DA wants to get elected by putting as many man years of incarceration. It doesn't matter how many teachers and how many people in his community, which is a small part of a county of sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 million people. So that those two things in and of themselves, I think, account for a large part of the disparity in arrests, convictions, and sentences of black and white offenders. I'm trying to keep it fairly brief, so I'm going to leave it at that. And all I got to say, 3% for life, and keep it Taylor and stay Kanye free.